You ever thought about that verse? I looked at it many years ago and began to question what Peter was trying to say in there. For one thing, he says, we didn't make up these stories. We're eyewitnesses of it. Then he goes on to say, we saw prophecy fulfilled. And he says, you've got something even better than our eyewitness story. I didn't pick up on that right at first, but that is one of his points in there. Now, I don't know about you, but most of the time we think of an eyewitness story as one of the most valid things to trust. But Peter says, you've got something better, and he says it's prophecy. I wondered, how could prophecy be better? But if I put that back in the context of what he's talking about, what he says is that the reason it's better is you get to be an eyewitness too. When you see things fulfilled, you're an eyewitness, just like he was. In other words, you get to test it yourself. You don't just take his word for it, you test it yourself. Does prophecy matter? I thought about using for a text this morning the verse where Jesus talks about the judgment, and he says, some that are going to be lost are going to say to me, but Lord, we cast out demons in your name and we healed the sick in your name. He says, get away from me, I never knew you. But I thought, that's kind of a negative text. Not sure that'd be the best idea. But there is something in that text, and frankly, for me, that's one of the scariest texts in all of the Bible. Because it indicates that people who think they are doing right and think they are being saved can be lost. Is that me? I better be careful. My relationship with my God better be pretty close. I better know him. Otherwise, I could be in trouble. What I'm going to share with you this morning in this sermon is a bit of a personal testimony. I found out, if you will, the hard way that prophecy matters. I'm not going to give you the whole story, but I'm going to give you a little bit of it. And I also want to make a connection for you for a sermon that I gave about 3 years ago that you can find on the church website if you want to. It's an MP3 player. It's not a video, it's an MP3. It's a sermon entitled 1844, A Great Disappointment or a Rich Blessing. And the reason that sermon came about was because of some of the stuff I'm going to talk about this morning and some of my mistakes. And I had discovered some things, and when I got to talking to people a little bit about it, some of my fellow elders got a little upset with me for talking about it at the time. And Pastor Jerry kind of bailed me out, but he said, I want you to do a sermon on this topic, but I want you to take it from the positive rather than the negative, because if you start with the negative, nobody listens. That's valid. That sermon 3 years ago was the result of that. He forced me to go further in what I had already studied and learned, and it was a tremendous blessing to me. I thank him greatly for that. Okay? Today, I'm going to back up a little bit, though, and give you some of the reasons why I got stimulated to look into that. And I'm going to be a bit vulnerable in telling you that I screwed up. I made some mistakes. But hopefully, you can learn from my mistakes, and you don't make the same ones. And they say that if you're going to preach about something, you need support of people who care about you. Well, my wife's not here this morning, so it must be a bad sermon. Seriously, though, she is suffering from vertigo this morning. Started to hit her yesterday, and she said, I'm not sure I'm going to make it. The world is spinning. And my son left the country, so what can I say? Thank you. No, he's on a mission trip. My mom did make it, you know. You can always trust Mom. Okay? Notice this text, John 14:29. I have told you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you might believe. That's why prophecy was given. It wasn't given to us so that we could figure out all the future and tell everybody, oh, this is what's going to happen now, and this is what's going to happen next, and all that. It's so that when you see it happen, you can believe. You get to be an eyewitness, just like Peter said. When Jerry asked me to speak this week, quite honestly, I didn't know what I was going to talk about. And I asked him, I said, what topic do you want me to cover? I said, I've got several sermons I've given in the past. I mentioned one on Revelation 9 that Doyle Johnson asked me to give several years ago. And I gave it up at snow camp, up at Big Lake. And a lot of people weren't there, so I thought, well, we could do that one again. When I mentioned that, Jerry said, well, that might be very timely. And I came to him later and I said, but, you know, my son has an issue with sometimes talking about prophecy. He said, it's always just a bunch of people arguing and it's pointless and all of that. And I said, well, there's got to be some relevance to it. I said, there's got to be some implications. Brian said, yeah, I guess. I asked Jerry, I said, do you know of any of the implications of Revelation 9 and its fulfillment? He said, no, I don't know of any. Oh, well, you're great help. You wanted me to talk about it. Why? I'm going to cover a little bit of Revelation 9 this morning, but I'm not going to go into great detail on it. I would love to sometime with some of you. It's one that's not talked about very often, but there's tremendous impact. One of our other church members played into this topic this morning because here a little while back, they got to chatting with me at an elders meeting, and I shared some of the stuff that I'm going to share with you this morning, and they got pretty excited. Happened to be one of them that was a little upset at me earlier. I'll give them room. Things were troublesome back then. They were very grateful. They said, thank you, this helps a lot. I hope it helps some of you as well. But as I was wrestling with this topic, on Facebook popped up an image. This is an announcement from the Adventist Review of an article that was published March 8th, 2019. I would counsel you to go read this. Highly recommend it. It's an incredible article by Clifford Goldstein. I like his title, Cliff's Edge. Many who profess to be Seventh-day Adventists promulgate views that, if correct, make a mockery of our faith. And he says, cyberspace has revealed how much the truths that make us Seventh-day Adventists and not another faith are under attack, and from within. Scour the blogs and you will see many who profess to be Seventh-day Adventists promulgating views that, if correct, make a mockery of our faith. Take, for instance, the argument that the little horn of Daniel 8 is Antiochus Epiphanes. I don't know, some of you may have never even heard of that name. If true, then the prophecy of Daniel 8 would have been completed almost 2 centuries before the cross, which would mean that the entire prophetic foundation is a farce. The 1844 date a fantasy, the justification for our existence a myth, and our prophet deluded, or worse, a demonic liar and deceiver. And he says, this is just the tip of the iceberg. He goes on and talks about evolution. He talks about some other prophetic ideas and things that are being promoted, and points out what some of the problems are. Some deep stuff, but an excellent article. When this popped up, I thought, well, maybe it is okay to talk about prophecy in the topics. Here's some prophetic books, or not prophetic books, but books about prophecy. The one on the bottom, Decoding Bible Prophecy, I read that probably 8-9 years ago. It mentions something in that book that I had come across in my mistake. And it's the only, or I should say the first time that I ever heard it mentioned in an Adventist sermon or an Adventist book. I was surprised and encouraged. It's got some huge implications. The other two, obviously, are talking about Islam. Those two books focus particularly on Daniel 11, talking about the king of the north and the king of the south. These are individuals who've studied into it. They're both Adventist pastors. They're looking at it deeply, trying to figure out what it might mean. What's Daniel 11 all about? And these two topics have been debated a lot. What I find interesting is that those two books present contradictory views. A lot of confusion over some of these topics. So let's see if prophecy matters. What did I learn? Let's look at Revelation 9. Told you we'll touch on it. It plays a role in Christian and Seventh-day Adventist understanding of prophecy that most of us have never realized. In Revelation 9, there's talks about two woes in that chapter. They occur as the first two parts of three woes, or the first two woes of three that are mentioned in Revelation 8:13, where it says, woe, woe, woe. Okay? These two woes are also events that happen under the fifth and the sixth trumpets of the seven trumpets that are described in Revelation 8 through 11. And there's time periods that are listed for the length of each of these trumpets. But what are these verses about? It's not discussed much anymore, yet its fulfillment had a huge impact on our beliefs, and surprisingly, even on the establishment of America as a nation. To back up and get a little history on where this comes from, we need to go back to William Miller, who was preaching in 1838 about the soon return of Jesus Christ that he thought was coming in 1844. And his message was the hour of his judgment has come, but he thought the judgment and the coming were the same thing. It's one of the mistakes he made. Came to his conclusions based on calculating out a 23-day prophetic period that's mentioned in Daniel 8:13. As I said, he got the wrong event. And he started into this study to prove that there wasn't a God. He didn't think there was, and some friends of his that were infidels or atheists were encouraging him to prove it, that the Bible wasn't accurate. There wasn't a God who predicted the future. Christians just make it look like it when they try and make prophecy fit some event after the fact. So Miller got to studying it out, and he began to become convinced that maybe there was a God, and that maybe prophecy was being fulfilled accurately as he studied this 2,300 days in Daniel 8:14. He used the idea that a day of prophetic time represents a year of literal time when he calculated out the time periods. This happens to be the same method Jesus used when he was predicting his death at the time of John the Baptist's beheading. They had cut John's head off, and some of John's followers came to Jesus and said, "Watch out. That guy wants to get you too." He says, "You go tell him. In 3 days, I'll lay this body down." That was 6 months into the ministry of Jesus that this happened. It was 3 years later that he died. This is a picture of William Miller. He was a farmer who, in studying this stuff, was convicted that he ought to preach it. He didn't want to. He had a fight going with God for probably over 10 years about not preaching it. And his conscience kept bugging him. And one morning he made an agreement with God to soothe his conscience that if God sent somebody to preach, ask him to preach about it, he'd preach it. And he figured, I got God there because I'm just a stupid old farmer and nobody even knows I've been studying, and I'm certainly not a preacher. Within minutes after making this promise and deal with God and getting peace, there's a knock at the door. His nephew was there at 6 in the morning. "What are you doing here?" he said. "Is the family okay?" Because the nephew lived 13 miles away. He said, "Nah, family's fine, but, well, what'd you come for?" He said, "Dad's in charge of the service at our Baptist church this week, and the preacher can't be there, and he wanted to know if you'd come and preach about that prophecy stuff you've been studying." Miller screamed at God and went running past his nephew, yelling at God, "Not fair, not fair, not fair." 2 hours later, he came back from the woods a preacher, and the rest is history. He preached it all over the United States, and the message spread to Europe too. But there was a young Methodist itinerant preacher and a physician named Josiah Litch that was encouraged by a friend to read some of Miller's sermons. Now, Litch had a vigorous mind, and you'd say an analytical guy, probably a little bit like me. But he also had courage about advocating what he thought was truth. It's kind of outspoken. He did not agree with Miller's sermons that Jesus was coming in 1844, but he did agree to study them at a friend's request. And he looked at his calculating method of time and decided to apply it on his own to some other prophecies. This is Josiah Litch. He was a man who was avid about sharing his beliefs regarding slavery and prohibition. I said he was outspoken, but he was also well respected as a speaker on these topics. He took this same passion and he exercised it in presenting his findings about prophecy from his research in the Bible. So he published a paper in 1838 entitled "A Midnight Cry, or a Review of Mr. Miller's Lectures," stating that he thought something major was going to happen to the Ottoman Empire in August of 1840. He based his prediction on the day for a year principle and applying it to the time periods that are mentioned in Revelation 9. He also based a lot of his work on the writings of Edward Gibbons, who was a renowned historian of the Roman Empire's decline. That was 1838. Then on August 1st, 1840, he redefined his prediction of the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and he said it's going to happen on August 11, 1840. He published this very widely. Most of the time when somebody does something like this, you got a nutcase on your hands. We've seen it happen. Many people thought he was nuts because the Ottoman Empire was a superpower. The infidel societies of the day, or atheist societies as they were known, had a field day with this. They claimed that Christians try to make it look like prophecy is true after the event happens. They say there really isn't a God who foretells the future, and they said, we got a good one on our hands right now. Look at this Christian. He's predicting the future even to the day. It ain't going to happen. Watch. Now we're going to prove that there is no God. In Litch's day, Islam and the Ottoman Empire was a major superpower of the world. It was centered in Istanbul, Turkey, formerly known as Constantinople. The Ottoman Empire had attacked and conquered much of the eastern side of Europe that had been loyal to Papal Rome over many years. They held a role similar to Russia in the late 1990s as a superpower. So Litch is a nut. But the Ottoman Empire did fall on August 11, 1840, exactly as he had predicted it. The British nations took it over, and it became known as the Sick Man of the East from that point on. This fulfillment convinced many lay people and ministers that there was something to William Miller's preaching about 1844, which he was using the day for a year. So that message really took off after this. Because of this, literally thousands of infidels became Christians. It hit them right between the eyes. This fulfillment is one of the many reasons why we know today that the day for a year principle is biblically accurate. It proved it. The rubber hit the road. There was other early Christian authors who thought Revelation 9 was about Islam. Martin Luther's one of them. That one shocked me when I read some of his comments. Isaac Newton, most of you know him as the guy with the apple. He didn't know he was a theologian. He actually wrote an article about how Antiochus Epiphanes can't be the power of Daniel 8. I have that in my computer. Lists several others. You see J.A. Wiley, who's the author of The History of Protestantism, and Edward Gibbons. There's several of them there. But Revelation 9 isn't talked about much today. Why? Because it's in the past, and Islam and Turkey haven't been big figures in politics until more recently. Also, there's been some Adventist theologians who've tried to come up with other prophetic views that they think fit better than Litch's. Some of them think the trumpets and the plagues are the same. Others question the Greek translation of the word hour in chapter 9, where it talks about a day, an hour. Okay? That's during the sixth trumpet. Some say it doesn't mean a length of time like Litch thought it did. Some think the symbols don't fit real well, especially the seal of God in the forehead that's mentioned in there. Because of that seal, some of them teach that the trumpets are yet in the future. Preconceived ideas. They impact what you think sometimes. In 2013, one church scholar even wrote a book saying there might be two fulfillments of the trumpets, one in the past and one in the future. I read a comment article about that the other day that said, I'm not sure this man adds a whole lot to the discussion in his book. In fact, it might even be deleterious to our belief system. It's controversial. Because of the controversy, it's often not discussed, even though its fulfillment in 1840 proved the day for a year principle as correct and provided a great impetus to the 1844 date that Miller was talking about and the fulfillment of it and the things we learned going through that experience. The fact that it caused a great number of atheists to become Christians, I think, is pretty significant too. And what are the odds that someone could predict this event ahead of time so accurately? There's too many variables. The odds don't exist that he could do it just by chance. I don't think he got lucky. So what? There may be some implications for our understanding of Daniel 11 in this fulfillment. What about Islam's increased involvement in the world conflict in our news today? As you know, it's been hot just the last few weeks. You talk about New Zealand, all the uproar that's coming, and I've heard it on both sides. It also impacts our understanding of the seventh trumpet's events and the possible fulfillment of the third woe. We got to be careful here, though. This is future. Don't get too dogmatic. I'm going to give you kind of a quick overview of Revelation 9 and why Litch thought about it and why he came up with some of his ideas. This is not exhaustive. I would love to sit and discuss it with you more, but there's not time. The Islamic power during the time of the fifth trumpet. The leader who followed Muhammad gave his army officers instructions to only kill certain types of people if they wouldn't become Muslims when they fought their jihad. The others they were to leave alone. He also told them to leave the plants alone. And he taught his followers, Muhammad did, to respect Jews and Jesus and true Christians who followed the Old Testament. He called them people of the book. And he said they worship Allah, the God of Abraham. That's a surprise to some people. Abu Bakr gave instructions to his Muslim troops. He's the leader that followed Muhammad. Look at these instructions. Remember that you are always in the presence of God on the verge of death, in the assurance of judgment and the hope of paradise. Avoid injustice and oppression. Consult with your brethren and study to preserve the love and confidence of your troops. Sounds like good advice. When you fight the battle of the Lord, acquit yourselves like men, without turning your backs. But let not your victory be stained with the blood of women and children. Destroy no palm trees, nor burn any fields of corn. Cut down no fruit trees, nor do any mischief to cattle, only such as you kill to eat. When you make any covenant or article, stand to it and be as good as your word. And as you go on, you will find some religious persons who live retired in monasteries and propose themselves to serve God that way. Let them alone. Neither kill them nor burn their monasteries. You'll find another sort of people that belong to the synagogue of Satan, who have shaven crowns. Be sure to cleave their skulls and give them no quarter till they either turn Mohammedan or pay tribute. This is quoted from Edward Gibbon's book. Do you see how close the command is to the description given in Revelation 9 that I've listed right ahead for you? And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men who have not the seal of God in their foreheads. It's almost a quote. That caught Litch's attention. Unfortunately, most Christians today view history through the Roman Catholic perspective of history, where the Crusades tried to rescue the Holy Land from the heathen and ungodly Islam, rather than thinking that God may have his hand in the rise and fall of nations. Because of this, Islam and Islamic people are often viewed only through eyes that are often critical. But did God use them for his own purpose? Basically, the Ottoman Empire attacked the supporters of papal Rome and its priests, and yet were pretty tolerant of Jews and Bible-believing Christians most of the time. Their anti-Semitic attitudes that you see today developed in their association with Nazi Germany. And in Armenia and Ethiopia, the Sabbath-keeping Christians were spared when they attacked those areas. I find that interesting. They hurt the eastern part of the Roman Empire of papal Rome, but did not destroy it from 1299 to 1449. This is a period of 150 years. You'll notice it's described in verse 5. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when it striketh at man. This movement ruled much of the continent of Asia and Europe at one time in history. It's known as the Ottoman Empire. It was held together by the Islamic faith, which came out of the Arabian desert, or uninhabitable place. And if you look in Revelation 9, it says that the locusts would come out of the abyss. An abyss means uninhabitable place. The locusts that attacked Israel and created all the plagues and stuff over the years, when they came, always came from the Arabian desert area. In fact, the desert locust is almost, its spread and where it lives is almost the exact same area as the Muslim Empire during that time. They had warriors that were described, they looked very much like the description given in Revelation 9. We read about the command. There's other characteristics. Because of time, we're going to have to go on. Look at the warriors. Their colors were blue, yellow, and red. That's what's described in Revelation 9. They had something like a gold crown on their heads, and their hair was like women's hair. You look at those. There's the gold crown. Look at the colors. Look at the hair. These are pictures of the Ottoman warriors. The time period. The first woe was 5 prophetic months. The first invasion by the Turks into Eastern Roman Empire took place on July 27, 1299, with the invasion of Nicomedia. And the trumpet, or 150 years, ended on July 27, 1449, when Constantine, the last Roman emperor, refused to ascend the throne without the permission of the Ottoman Turks. It's 150 years. It's funny the Roman emperor wouldn't ascend the throne unless the Turks or the Muslims agreed with it. Another time period that's described in the sixth trumpet. An hour, a day, a month, and a year. If you calculate that out, that's 391 years and 15 days if you use the prophetic day for a year. From July 27, 1499, when he ascended the throne, to August 11, 1840 is 391 years and 15 days, which is why Litch said that's when it's going to happen. Mentions here about what happened. We have another time clue that Litch didn't have for these trumpets. The sixth angel blows his trumpet, and a voice is heard from the golden altar before God. This altar is located in the holy place of the sanctuary in heaven, so the trumpet must be blown before Jesus moves into the most holy. In contrast, the seventh trumpet's blown and the time for judging of the dead starts. Also, when it's blown, the Ark of the Covenant is seen in the open temple in heaven. The Ark's in the most holy. Jesus moved there to begin the judgment in 1844, from our understanding of what we went through in our great disappointment. What a blessing that we learned that stuff. This means the sixth trumpet must be before October 22nd, 1844, and the seventh trumpet begins at about that date. Here's Martin Luther had a view. Told you he thought that it was Islam. In fact, when they were attacking Germany, when the Muslims were, the Catholic Church accused him of being the cause of it because he wouldn't accept the papacy and was in rebellion about it. And he said, no, this isn't true. He said, it's you that have brought on this Abaddon onto Germany. He uses the word Abaddon. The only place that is in the Bible is in Revelation 9. Talks about it being the ruler of the uninhabitable place. Okay? J.A. Wiley talks about it after he's talking about Luther and describing this. He says that when Solomon, one of the leaders of the Islamic force, attacked Hungary where King Louis reigned, he was carrying out the orders of the Pope to destroy the Lutherans there. That's what Louis was doing. Solomon killed 28 princes, 500 nobles, 7 bishops, and 20,000 warriors on the plain of Mohawks, including King Louis of Hungary. Having trampled down the king and his army, the victorious Solomon held on his way into Hungary and slaughtered 200,000 of its inhabitants. This calamity, which thrilled all Europe, did what? Brought rest to the Protestants. And many of the towns of Hungary embraced the Reformation. Wow. Wiley thinks they're fulfilling this prophecy. Can you imagine what if that happened today? How would it bode for us, the remaining Protestants? I can only imagine how the Western military world, and especially how social media would talk about it. Wipe out 200,000? Those Muslims did it. Was God using them to protect? Maybe. It appears that way. Does that seem strange? Remember Joseph in the pit? It was the Ishmaelites who saved him when his brothers were going to kill him. This action that they were doing made the Protestant Reformation a success. It would have been wiped out had they not done this. I'm not advocating war and slaughter and all that, but it would have been wiped out. Because it occurred and was successful, the philosophies of it caused this nation to be set up. That means if they hadn't done what they did, this nation wouldn't have existed. That's sobering, and it seems like a total contradiction with what we understand about things today. Maybe it's not. This is a quote from Great Controversy. This one was referenced in the Sabbath school lesson just recently when we were studying about the trumpets, but it didn't get brought out real clear about Litch and some of the stuff, probably because of the conflicts and controversies that get discussed. Great controversy, she writes, in the year 1840, another remarkable fulfillment of prophecy excited widespread interest. 2 years before, Josiah Litch, one of the leading ministers preaching the Second Advent, published an exposition of Revelation 9, predicting the fall of the Ottoman Empire. According to his calculations, this power was to be overthrown in AD 1840, sometime in the month of August. And only a few days previous to its accomplishment, he wrote, and here she's quoting him, allowing the first period of 150 years to have been exactly fulfilled before Deacazes ascended the throne by permission of the Turks, and that the 391 years, 15 days commenced at the close of its first period, it will end on the 11th of August, 1840, when the Ottoman power in Constantinople may be expected to be broken. And this, I believe, will be found to be the case. Josiah Litch in Signs of the Times, August 1, 1840. Ellen White goes on to say, at the various times specified, Turkey, through her ambassadors, accepted the protection of the Allied powers of Europe and thus placed herself under the control of Christian nations. The event exactly fulfilled the prediction. When it became known, multitudes were convinced of the correctness of the principles of prophetic interpretation adopted by Miller and his associates, and a wonderful impetus was given to the Advent movement. Men of learning and position united with Miller both in preaching and in publishing his views, and from 1840 to 1844 the work rapidly extended. Do you see what her belief was about Revelation 9? She saw it being fulfilled by this. It has some pretty important implications. We need to be careful what we think is correct sometimes. Some of the implications. What about moving the trumpets into the future, as many do? What's that mean for us? It's got several implications for Revelation 10 and 11 and Daniel 8, 9, 11, and 12 in their time periods. Is the 2300-day prophecy understanding we have valid, or is it just that we're a crazy cult, as some say? It was based on the day for a year. What about the investigative judgment that we've learned about, law and grace? Are we all messed up? Is Jesus pleading our case now? And what about Ellen White? Was she a true prophet or a false one? Let's look at one of the implications, the day for a year principle. This is where some of my mistakes in study got going. I had to go back and look at this. Daniel 8, 11 through 14 and 27 says that an abomination is set up making the sanctuary desolate, and that it takes the daily way, and it lasts 2,300 evenings and mornings until the sanctuary is cleansed. And you're going to notice on this graph, all I did was draw a timeline here, and I put 2,300 at one end and 0 at the other. There's no dates in here. Okay? The prophecy doesn't give dates at that spot. But the prophecy is explained more in Daniel 9. Here's that same timeline, 2,300 years, or 2,300, not 2,300 years. Let's leave that off for the moment. There's a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. There's an anointed one, or Messiah, that comes at 69 weeks. There's one more week in 70 weeks that are cut off for Daniel's people. And in the middle of it, sacrifices and offerings cease. Doesn't give an ending event here for the 70. It just says your time's up. And then there's 1,810 days left until you reach the end of the 2,300 when it said the sanctuary would be cleansed. Again, I have not put any dates in here. Okay? We're just taking the prophecy the way it is. The way we usually present this in our church and in our evangelistic meetings is what we figured out from our disappointment and Miller's study. Here's the 2,300. Here's that same graph drawn, only now we put the dates in. Yes, in 457 there was a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. That's true. 70 weeks, if you took a day for a year, is 490 years. That takes you down to AD 34. That's when it ends. But at the 69th week, the Messiah was to appear, and we say as Christians that it's Jesus of Nazareth. He was anointed, the Gospels, or the Bible writers tell us in the New Testament, when he was baptized by the Holy Spirit. So he would become the anointed one. That happened in 27 AD, according to the Scripture and comparing it with history. So Jesus of Nazareth appears to fit it. 3.5 years later, he's crucified, cut off, but not for himself. And sacrifices and offerings cease. And the whole New Testament writes about it. Okay? From AD 34, you have 1,810 years till we get to 1844, and we say, well, that's when the investigative judgment began. Well, Miller said that's when Jesus was coming, and like I said, he had things a little mixed up when he thought that the second coming and the judgment were the same thing. Okay? This is how we usually present it, and we tend to think of this prophecy in these terms. But what about this abomination of desolation that Daniel speaks of in Daniel 8, 9, 11, and 12? Where's it fit in? I had never realized that these prophecies talk about the abomination. Does it fit in the chart? Could these time periods be associated with literal days? I wondered if maybe they were. I thought I knew what the fulfillment of the abomination of desolation was going to be, and I thought I knew why I believed that. I taught others that this was the fulfillment. My supposed understanding, I found out, is very common for many Adventists to hold that view. In fact, I've heard Adventist evangelists preach sermons on it and give very good explanations as to why they think this view is correct. They show a picture of an eagle. It's clamped on things with its head turned to the right, and they'll tell you that was the flag that was planted in the holy ground around Jerusalem when the Roman soldiers attacked in 70 AD. Okay? And Jesus did warn about the abomination of desolation doing something and surrounding Jerusalem then, and said, get out. Okay? So they say, see, that happened then. Well, in the future, we've got, if you look at a U.S. dollar bill, you'll see that same eagle sitting there with his head turned to the right. Said, see the connection? The U.S. is involved in this. And it has something to do with Rome, because it was Rome that surrounded. And their arguments look really good. Look very convincing. Okay? But I found out that there's some implications that I was unaware of. My interpretation of the abomination was this. I thought it was going to be the setting up of a national Sunday law in the United States. And when that was set up, we're supposed to flee to the mountains just like Israel was supposed to flee from Jerusalem. And that's what some of these teachers have talked about. They've presented it that way. It seemed to make sense to me. I thought I'd learned this from a statement that Ellen White made. I thought this is what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 24. Okay? That it was going to happen again, be a second fulfillment. So when someone talked about the abomination being set up and wanted to know what it was, I thought I was on solid ground for saying this is what it's going to be. Furthermore, when I read Daniel 11 and 12, or Daniel 12, 11 and 12, it says, and from the time that the continual burnt offering is taken away and the abomination to make desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. But blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. Because of my belief of what the abomination was, what it was going to be, I thought the time mentioned here was going to start sometime in the future when the Sunday law was enacted, because it says it starts with the abomination being set up. And this made me question an instructor of mine in college who was a prophecy specialist if these time periods could be literal days instead of prophetic days, and that they might be referring to how long Jacob's time of trouble might be. The instructor answered me that it was possible, but we weren't really sure. This was an expert. Was it true? And did it make any difference? Then there came a guest speaker here in McMillen who seemed to say that my view was correct. He said there was going to be a second fulfillment of the abomination being set up that was similar to the first one in 70 AD as he saw it. And he said there would be a second, but then he went on to say on another night that there were going to also be second literal day fulfillments of Revelation 8 and 9's time periods. That part bugged me. I could see the first one. It made sense. It was what I understood. But why in the world would you move the 8 and 9 time periods? I couldn't figure out why he was doing it, and it bothered me. I wondered if he was correct. Did I have something I needed to learn here? What I discovered in thinking about and trying to understand his reasoning, and it was hard, was that I found out that what you believe the abomination to be becomes a why in the road as to which way you go with your prophetic interpretation. I didn't realize that before. So what is the setting of the fulfillment, and does the Bible give us any clues? I had to go check what I thought. What I found out was that Ellen White does not make any statement like that. She does not say that's going to be the fulfillment. That troubled me because I was certain I had read it. What I found was one comment in Desire of Ages where she's talking about Jesus talking to his disciples about when the temple's going to be destroyed, what's described there in Revelation 24, or Matthew 24. And if I twisted it, what she said, I could kind of make it sound like that. And I had done that on my own, without even thinking about it. Ooh. I didn't realize I twisted it, though. And when I really got critically evaluating it, I found out that isn't at all what she says. What she says is there's going to be similarities, not second fulfillments. About this time, my father-in-law came and visited. He was head elder of a very large church in Denver for quite a few years. Godly man. And I started sharing with him my struggle trying to figure all this out and how much it was bugging me. And I was using him as a sounding board and just began reading to him every verse in the Bible that talked about the abomination, because I thought, I got to go straight to the Bible. If I didn't get this from Ellen White, where did I get this from? Let's dump everything. Let's go to just the Bible. So I'm looking at the verses, and I'm not finding a whole lot that gives me a clue. But when I started reading Daniel 11 to him, a light came on. And I said to him, it sounds like it puts it in a time frame. He said, read it again. I did. He said, yeah, it does sound that way. But he didn't know what the setting up of abomination was. Here's Daniel 11. This is verses 31 to 35. Forces from him, that's the king of the north, shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the continual burnt offering. They shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And those among the people who are wise shall make many understand, though they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder for some days. When they fall, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of those who are wise shall fall to refine and cleanse them, and to make them white. So this is their response to the abomination being set up. I had never caught that when I read it. And it says they do this until the time of the end. Whoa, what's that mean? That sounds like a time frame. For it's yet for the time appointed. There was a friend of mine, Dave Kerr. Many of you know him. He and I were going to the prison in Sheridan, doing chaplain services. And Dave's mind is such that he hooks onto something and he gets stuck on it sometimes. And he got stuck on a point that sometimes I wished he'd just let go of, because I thought he was making a big deal out of nothing. His point was, the time of the end is not the same as the end of time. Okay, Dave. But you know what? I found out he was right. And it had a lot more implications than I thought. And when I read this verse in 11 where it said, until the time of the end, what he said popped into my head, and I thought, oh, wait a minute. I need to look at this. I found out this is one of the things the Millerites messed up on. They thought they were the same thing. Okay? The phrase end of time is mentioned in Revelation 10, 5 and 6. The Millerites thought this was about them. They thought it applied to them. Pastor Bryson preached a sermon about this time in my life that said Revelation 10 is about the disappointment that we went through. And the main reason that I've heard that presented and that he presented is because it was sweet and then bitter. And Revelation 10 talks about an experience of eating a book that's sweet and then bitter. Okay, that seems to fit. But the more I thought about it, I thought, wait a minute. There's got to be more to it than that. That's a pretty flimsy argument because there's been a lot of things that were sweet and bitter. So I went back and started reading. I came across this verse in Revelation 10, 5 and 6. Obviously, Jesus didn't come, so the Millerites, were they wrong about that, thinking that verse was wrong about them? Here's the verse. The angel I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven. Sorry about the misprint there. And swear by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that are therein, the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer. That's his announcement. But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants the prophets. Well, if I take that as time no longer to mean the end of time, then what's this about the seventh trumpet and something happening then? That doesn't work. And later on, if you read that whole chapter, you find out that after they go through this experience, they're supposed to prophesy and teach more about Jesus. Well, then it can't be the end of time. But that's what it says. Got to discussing with somebody else. They didn't have the King James, so we looked it up in the Revised Standard, and it says that the announcement he made was that there should be delay no longer, or no more delay. Whoa, wait a minute. That doesn't sound like time no more. In fact, that sounds totally different. What's going on? How could these translators present two things and translate it so totally different? So I went and looked it up. The word there for time or delay is the Greek word chronos. Chronos means time, but when I looked it up in the Greek dictionary, the lexicon, I found out it's a special kind of time. It's not a point in time like 12 o'clock. It's not that kind of time. Now, that's what the Millerites thought it was. No, it's a period of time of set length that has to occur before something else can occur that comes after it. And because it's a set length, it causes a delay in what's coming after it by that amount of time. It's the root word for chronological or chronology. Sunday has to happen before Monday can. And it has to be 24-hour day period. It causes a delay in Monday coming by 24 hours. Okay? You making sense of what it means? So a literal translation of that is there's no more time periods that are causing a delay. If you're going to come to that point in history, you have to reach the end of the longest of the time periods, which takes you to something called the end of time, of chronos, that's mentioned. The end of the long periods. Okay? The longest one in prophecy is the 2,300 days. We have the starting event listed. We got a date for it that seems to fit in what Miller talked about. So if he's right, then it had to end in 1844. That would be the end of chronos. And it's when that happens, when you reach that this experience of the sweet and the bitter happens. So I begin to realize Bryson was right when he said that chapter was about us. And I found out it has to be right, or there's some huge implications if we say it's not. If 457 is the starting point, and a day for a year is true, we have the fulfillment of Jesus of Nazareth being the Messiah. According to Daniel 9, and I had not picked up on this until I started working through it, the abomination of desolation is set up after the end of the 70th week mentioned in Daniel 9:24. And it's still within the 2300 days, or before the time of the end, just like Daniel 11:35 said. Daniel 8 also says the abomination is set up during the 2300 days. So I've got Daniel 8, Daniel 9, and 11 agreeing. Well, then in Daniel 12, there's these time periods mentioned that start with it being set up and a certain amount of time happening. That means that those have to have occurred before the end of the 2300, or I haven't reached the end of Chronos. Okay? So Daniel 8, 9, 11, and 12 all agree. I discovered that it's set up sometime before the end of the 2300 days. I didn't know there was that much agreement. I had no idea that it was tightly connected like that. As I told you, this is the way we usually present that 2300, and we put the dates in there. What happens if we change some of that? Where's the abomination go? Right there. Somewhere in that time period it has to be set up. But Daniel 12 says there's got to be a certain amount of time before it reaches this point where no Chronos is. If you calculate back, the latest it can occur and still do all of that is 508. I'm not going to go into what the abomination is today, but there's a clue there. It's telling you when it was set up. Okay? What happens if we say the days that are mentioned are literal days instead of prophetic days, meaning years? Let's go back. If that 490 years is actually 490 days, then this arc goes only to about here. That means that the 69 weeks has to be fulfilled back here. That means you got a different Messiah. Ooh, that's not cool. That's a major problem. I better throw that idea out. Otherwise, Christianity goes to pot. I didn't know it was that critical. So that fulfillment, proving the day for a year prophecy, has an impact. What happens if we place the setting up of the abomination at a different date or in a different time slot? Because we think it's something else or something future, like I thought. What I've done here is try to illustrate for you what happens. This was a hard slide to figure out how to do. Right here, I've got that original 2300 days listed the way we usually see it and talk about it. I got a timeline running here. We're down here to 2019, our day. Okay? Up above, I've drawn another timeline that normally I wanted to just leave here and do what I was going to do, but the slide in the computer won't let me do it. So I drew it up above here, and I've put 2019 on that timeline up here. Okay? Let's assume that my theory was correct, that it's going to be the National Sunday Law. It's going to be in the future. Okay? Let's test it. For testing purposes, let's say it's set up sometime here in 2019, a couple of months from now, 6 months, whatever you want to make it. Okay? What does that do to things? Let me show you. This graph here is now up here. Right here is your 70 weeks. Here's your 2300. So from here to here is this graph. The abomination had to be set up in this period of the 2300. So I've got it at 2019, but Daniel 12 says there has to be 1,335 days from it to something, to the end of Chronos. So that means Chronos ends in what, 3354? Holy smokes. That's the time of the end? I thought we're living in the time of the end. That's a big implication. And when does the decree to restore and rebuild? 1054 AD? That's pretty hard to find an event for. That doesn't work. But what about this? Messiah shows up in 1522. So who's the Messiah now? You see the problem with my theory? The abomination cannot be the setting up of the National Sunday Law. It can't be something in the future. If it is, you got a problem, a major problem. What's the implications? Chronos is mentioned in Revelation 9 and 11 when the fifth and the sixth trumpets are mentioned, so they got to be fulfilled before 1844, or your Messiah changes. Everything changes. If the day for year is not correct, Messiah changes. Everything falls apart. If there's a second fulfillment, as some are suggesting, then there would have to be another Messiah or another time when Chronos ends. That doesn't work. There's also going to have to be another day of cleansing of the sanctuary. Everything falls apart. In other words, if these fulfillments that we've learned about in our past aren't true, then not only is the Seventh-day Adventist Church a scam, but so is all of Christianity. The New Testament's not true. I had no idea that my thought and my interpretation could have those kinds of implications. Oh, my word. I need to change my ideas. Law and grace fall apart. These are horrible implications. I had no idea. I innocently thought I was right. That's pretty humbling. To realize you screwed up that bad when you think you're following truth. Have you ever been deceived like that and made a mistake? It's tough. I never knew you, Jesus says, because you got a different Messiah. Oh, my word. That could be me. To put it bluntly, everything falls apart about Christianity and the gospel when you start messing with prophecy like this and coming up with different interpretations. Yet they're being promoted all over the place. As Clifford Goldstein writes, it's going on in Adventism. Should we be surprised? As he points out, it happened in the early church. Why would we be surprised that it happens here? That's why the Apostle Paul and the other apostles wrote their letters trying to deal with this, to bring us back. But the gospel is true. Jesus is the Messiah. So it does matter what people teach and believe about the fulfillments of prophecy and what's true about Jesus as Messiah and a whole lot more. Because otherwise, you're not going to be an eyewitness. You might witness it, but you aren't going to know it. So you're going to miss the truth. This experience gave me some understandings about how to evaluate new interpretations of prophecy. Be careful. Chronos is a big, big thing. And I discovered recently, if you look at the sixth trumpet, there's another Chronos time period mentioned in there, 3.5 days. That one fits in the right time slot as well. You need to be careful about what you teach. You might be misleading. Do you want to be responsible for that? So I've learned Satan's prowling about as a lion, and he's very good at deceiving. Even the elect, if I think I'm the elect. He's put together some very special deceptions for the elect. We like to talk about Sabbath and Sunday. That's the bait. Sabbath and Sunday is an issue, but be careful what you do with it. Satan can use it on you. We need to cling very tightly to Jesus and what he's taught us by leading us in the past. Not forgetting what we've learned from our mistakes, what we learned going through 1844. Ellen White tells us if we lose track of that, we're going to be lost. That's scary. He taught us a lot in that experience, because in the end, it's all about Jesus. If what we're teaching doesn't bring us back to Jesus, there's a problem with it. If it does away with Jesus, it's a problem. And we need to make some changes. Folks, I made a mistake on this in my early life. I had to learn the hard way. I hope this gives you some tools to try and evaluate things so you don't have to make the same mistake I made and get fooled. And I would encourage you to go on the next step, like Jerry pushed me to go when I preached the sermon 3 years ago. You're going to learn even more about Jesus and the tremendous blessing of what we went through in 1844, what we learned about our gospel and about our God. Let's not forget it. Keep anchoring. It's on Jesus. That's everything. Let's bow our heads. Father God, forgive us when we make mistakes. Sometimes we're just ignorant. Sometimes we think we're doing what's right. And I thank you so much for the grace that you give us, that you teach us, and that even in our mistakes you haven't left us, and that you help us learn. Thank you for helping us remember it's all about Jesus, and that he saves us, and that even in our mistakes he's saving us as he teaches us. Thank you for the blessing. And Lord, I pray that this has been a blessing for these people. I realize it's gone long, and I don't know how else I could have done it. But hopefully it helps, so that as they run up against these different theories out there, they have a way to try and evaluate that can help them remember it has to be about you. Thank you, Jesus. In thy name we pray. Amen.